For years, the Souls-like genre has slowly been stepping into the spotlight, finding a few dedicated fans with Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and then growing that audience even further with Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, and then Sekiro a few years later. It's hard to imagine a time where they weren't so popular, but that was the reality. What really pushed the genre into the mainstream was Elden Ring. I'm sure, just like everyone else, you've heard of Elden Ring, and I'm sure, just like everyone else, you've probably played it too. Elden Ring made From Software an unstoppable juggernaut of game design, even though they were doing pretty well for themselves before. It was most people's first Souls-like, and it made a lot of those same people want to explore what else the genre had to offer. The sad truth is, most of the options outside of From Software are, to put it lightly, not very good. At the very least, none have really garnered the same wide critical acclaim as From Software's winning formula. Until Round 8 Studio, that is, a small team of developers based in South Korea with little to no accolades. On their very first try, Round 8 has nearly perfected the intricacies of the Souls-like genre. On their first attempt, they've solved most of the problems that I personally have with From Software's own games. They've created systems that outmatch the creativity of most Souls-likes, created bosses that either equal the best of From Software or actually outshine them, and forge a world with multifaceted characters and limitless potential. Let's talk about exactly what makes Lies of P so special. Before we go all in on Lies of P, I do want to preface this video with a couple of things. I really do believe that this game is special. This has quickly rocketed to being one of, if not my favorite Souls-likes, and while others have elements of Lies of P, I don't really think there's another one that upholds this level of quality throughout the entire runtime. So please, if this game looks interesting to you, or you enjoy From Software's games, I highly urge you to stop watching this video and play it yourself. As I've seen a couple of other reviewers say, if you enjoy these games more for their atmosphere or the experience, getting through this game might be a bit tough. I don't think it's necessarily the hardest of them, but it does require you to really understand the combat and all of its systems to make it through the game without feeling like it's unfair. I will avoid talking about major story spoilers, but I will probably be showing most of, if not all, the bosses, so just be wary of this. In this section, we're going to discuss the story and characters. I'm going to try to stick to the basic story setup and background. I'll also go into the environmental storytelling. I've already shown some stuff in the background, but if you feel like this might be too much for you, or you just simply don't care, then skip to the timecode on the screen to move on to the next chapter. Lies of P is themed around the story of Pinocchio. The base is pretty loose here, and the story very much creates its own identity while still paying tribute to the adventures of Pinocchio. The game takes place in the city of Krat, where there are a couple of major groups, the majority of which are just regular people with jobs living their lives. Then there are the Stalkers, a well-respected community of humans who wear animal masks and act as mercenaries, vigilantes, and the most famous of them being bodyguards to powerful nobles within Krat. There are two factions of Stalkers, which is pretty important within the story, but it doesn't matter much within the game, so we won't go into that here. Next up are the Alchemists, a well-known but very secretive agency that conducts experiments using science and some say even maybe magic. Somewhat adjacent to the Alchemists are the Workshop Union, a guild of skilled artisans pushing Krat deep into its industrial revolution using cutting-edge technology. That's where our beloved Giuseppe Geppetto comes in. A key member of the Workshop Union, Geppetto created the puppets as a means of automating many jobs. They mass-produce puppets for service, waste management, entertainment, even warfare. One day though, the strings of the puppets snapped, unleashing their mechanical wrath onto the city of Krat. The creations that once lifted the weight off of its people's shoulders and made the city a technological spectacle now filled the streets covered in blood and emanating a hatred that couldn't possibly be there because they aren't truly alive, right? As the city's walkways quiet down with almost no humanity left to remove, you awake, Geppetto's puppet. You're tasked with bringing an end to this madness and figure out what exactly went wrong. There are, of course, other key players and groups, but in the spirit of not spoiling everything, I'm going to stop there. Much like its level design, Lies of P has a fairly straightforward story. You're not required to read every item description or note you find. You'll actually get most of the key information while you're going through the motions. Characters will discuss story events and talk about what's going on, and while the notes are not required to enjoy the story, they are there if you want to learn more. The story and world in this game was one of my favorite parts, and undoubtedly one of the pieces that made this such a compelling experience for me. The story has characters that you'll learn more about just by playing through the game, and it doesn't require you to go and do your own research to understand what is happening around you. Its tragic story is full of important themes and has consequences, and though they may hit a bit harder if you're more invested and choose to go that extra mile, the game gives you enough to pick up on them without doing so. If you do want to make that extra effort to learn more, however, there are a lot of options open to you. Obviously, there's the notes and collectibles that you can check out, but it's also worth mentioning how well the environment tells the story of Krat. I think the very first area of the game does this really well. Right after you awake, as you're making your way through Krat Central Station, you'll hear a distant thumping, rhythmic, violent. You'll find a note shortly after that reads, "If anyone finds this, get out of this station and run. Steer clear of the waiting room. I saw a huge puppet smashing people to death in there." Lo and behold, if you look over the balcony, you'll see that huge puppet bashing something on the ground, over and over and over again. This was a really cool moment, and it set the tone of the game moving forward. There's a ton of examples like this in every single level, so much as newspaper clippings referencing weird individuals that you may have a brief encounter with later in the game. Each environment is so well detailed that you can almost visualize exactly what went down there, what attacked who, how blood ended up on that wall, where the attack came from. It's just clear that a lot of work was put in here. Even within the main story, each minute area has its own to tell. What may or may not be clear right off the bat is the sheer variety present from start to finish on the enemy side and the players. Enemy pools are split up into 3 factions: puppets, carcasses, and humans. The first 2 are the most interesting and also the ones that you'll be fighting throughout most of the game. Puppets tend to be fairly calculated, moving in a way that's very mechanical and predetermined. Carcasses, on the other hand, are rather erratic, with violent and rapid attacks. Humans, if anything, sort of mirror how you fight. In each subsequent area, the game introduces new enemies from each faction. By the end of the game, there is a frankly ridiculous pool of enemies you're encountering from each faction, and even in the final area, it's still giving us several new ones. There's a basic layer of enemies that are used in many areas, but then on top of that, there are rarer ones, and then on top of that, there are enemies that literally show up like 1 or 2 times throughout the entire game, like, for example, the Jester Robot or the Bear Carcass. It gets even more interesting later in the game when the factions start merging to create both harder and more interesting enemies. The first time you see a carcass merge with one of the puppets is only a little after the halfway point, through one of the bosses. Moving forward, you'll see basic enemies take on traits of both factions, combining the precise wind-up attacks of the puppets with the Bloodborne-esque flailing that the carcasses bring. The Soul series is often praised for its enemy variety, and Lies of P is no exception. Once these enemies start to combine, it doesn't cheapen the old enemies either. They still have their thing and they get the job done. These amalgamations just expand on them. They change up some of their moves, making them more difficult, but also allowing more options for you to break their posture with a couple of well-timed perfect guards. Lies of P also excels in the options that it gives to the player. In progression, for example, you're given several options, the most notable being the P organ. Yes, the P organ. The P organ is a skill tree system that provides meaningful upgrades in exchange for a rare item called quartz. There are these keystones which you'll unlock more of the more of them you get. These can be anything from more heal charges to a dodge enhancement to even more posture damage when parrying. To unlock a full keystone though, you'll have to use quartz to get these smaller upgrades, and once you get enough, it'll give you the big perk. This is sort of similar to Sekiro's skill tree in the sense that it's not just filler enhancements, it's actual improvements to your kit that you're excited to get. In a similar fashion, the Legion arm also gives you something to look forward to. Legion arms are variants of your robot arm with a pretty big selection as well. You can upgrade these to make them stronger or just outright do something different. By tinkering around with all these options, you'll be able to craft a build that works around your strengths, sort of like the weapon system. When you receive a weapon in this game, it's composed of 2 pieces, the head and the handle. The only exception to this rule being boss weapons. You can combine any head and any handle to create whatever combination that you can dream up. Some will be more effective than others, and most of them will look ridiculous, but the point is that whatever you create is your very own weapon. Around just about every corner is going to be a new one, so you'll constantly be getting new pieces to play around with and fit on top of other pieces. The boss weapons are all unique and very fun to use, but playing through the game and taking down bosses with a weapon that you forged yourself makes each win that much more impactful. Not only is the player provided with a ton of options when acting on an enemy, but you're also given several choices when reacting. The one players will probably be most comfortable with is dodging, mainly because that's what Souls games center around. They usually offer blocking or parrying, but is typically less effective than dodging. The window to dodge through attacks is tighter in Lies of P than most Souls games, so the timing may take some getting used to. Another thing to note is that you cannot dodge through Fury attacks with iframes. You can dodge out of the way, but if you try to dodge through them like other attacks, it will hit you every single time. Alternatively, the game allows you to block. If you get hit while blocking, you'll take a certain amount of chip damage, which you can regain by attacking the enemy, sort of like the rally system in Bloodborne. Similarly to dodging, you are not able to block Fury attacks. However, you are able to perfect guard Fury attacks. Perfect guards are this game's fancy way of saying parrying. It is also one of the major sources of criticism for the game, which I'll circle back to in a minute. If you hit the block button just before an attack lands, it will result in you parrying the attack, which won't deal any chip damage to you and also hurt the enemy's hidden posture bar. When you've dealt enough damage to the enemy's posture, their health bar will start to glow, which is when you can land a charge heavy to stagger them for an opening to hit a very powerful attack. The idea is that you want to vary your response to enemy attacks between these three options. If you're anything like me, you might decide towards the start of the game that you want to exclusively learn to parry bosses. Unfortunately, if you're anything like me, you'll have a very hard time doing that. While I did get pretty good at parrying almost every attack over the course of my 4 playthroughs of this game, you will occasionally just have to accept the fact that you can't win them all. When you choose to parry certain attacks and then dodge ones you're unsure of, the game gets a lot easier. It allows you to slip into a flow state where you're perfectly responding to every action an enemy takes at you, sort of like Sekiro, creating a really thrilling game loop with everything else. Unfortunately, now's the part where I talk about Dark Souls. More specifically, we'll be discussing Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice to help me diffuse some of the criticism around Lies of P. One of the main critiques of the game is that parrying is different from Sekiro. This is correct. This is a 100% correct statement. Given that it's a different game, it is not the same as Sekiro. Not only is this a stupid criticism, it's an unfair one. The parry timing in Lies of P is much tighter than it is in Sekiro, which a lot of people think is unreasonable. Sekiro is a hard game. I think it's probably the hardest that From Software has made, the hardest intentionally at least, and I think it's probably also their best. Prior to playing Lies of P, I had played most of Demon's Souls, most of Dark Souls 3, and I have finished Bloodborne and Elden Ring. I am not that great at these games, but Lies of P seemed interesting, and lo and behold, it took me by surprise. What shocked me was how many people complained about the parry timing in comparison to Sekiro, especially because I didn't really think it was that bad. So after I finished Lies of P twice, I willed myself to beat Sekiro pretty much exclusively for this video, and I ended up loving it. However, the allegations are true. Sekiro's timing is much more generous than Lies of P. I think it is a significantly more difficult game, but that's because it's built around its larger parry window and the fact that the entire main game will be centered around it. For those unfamiliar, fighting in Sekiro is very untraditional compared to most Souls games. It's not impossible to kill bosses without parrying, but it is very difficult and very tedious, and it's quite simply just not what you're supposed to be doing. They are made to be parried so that you can break their posture and hit them with a single death blow that will instantly reduce their health to 0. Each enemy will be launching about 1 billion attacks at you in very quick succession, which is what makes the game actually hard. They have different kinds of attacks with different responses like thrusts, sweeps, grabs, and lightning attacks, all of which require you to pay very close attention to what the enemy is actually doing. The point is, the parry window being larger doesn't make Sekiro an easier game. It just means that they understood its combat system. If Lies of P had the same window as Sekiro, you could beat the game in an hour, because bosses and the game as a whole aren't built to have a window that's probably double the length that it already is. I had a really difficult time during Sekiro's early game, because I was playing it like Lies of P. I was trying to mix dodges with blocks, and that's just not how you're supposed to play the game. As soon as I decided to take everything head on and play it like Sekiro, I started to enjoy it a lot more. In the same way, the hardest thing to learn in Lies of P is how to play it like Lies of P. If you play the game like it's Dark Souls and you exclusively try to dodge everything, it's going to be very difficult. If you play it like Sekiro and you choose to try and parry everything, it's probably going to be even harder. The thing is, parrying is there for mastery, not as your main and pretty much only option. Ultimately, do whatever you find fun, but I'm pretty sick of people using the comparison against Sekiro as a way to complain about the game. Next up, I'd like to discuss the world design. I think this is really important in most games, but level design and environmental storytelling are both huge staples of other Souls games. I feel like a broken record bringing it up over and over again, but I expect that most people who came here want to hear how does this compare to From Software, so I apologize if you get tired of hearing it. Anyways, it's a bit different compared to what you might be used to. Typically, the level design is fairly open, with a decent helping of exploration with side areas and hidden dungeons and whatnot. Lies of P is somewhat unique in that it's a more linear game. For most of its runtime, it's a level with a designated path and a couple of unlockable shortcuts along the way, topped off by a boss, then a visit back to the hub, then on to the next level. Aside from a few very small optional areas, that's pretty much the pattern for the entire game. Depending on what type of person you are, this could be both a positive or a negative for you. While I generally enjoy games that are very exploration heavy, I was fine with Lies of P's linearity. Since most of the games that I end up playing usually have a lot of lengthy sections and optional areas, it was nice to play something that required a little less mental mapping. I was able to just sort of go with the flow and keep playing without getting lost or having to redirect myself. That's not to say though that the game is lacking in content. My first playthrough took me around 24-25 hours, which is pretty long for a Souls game in general, but for a linear one at that, with such a well-defined order and relatively straight path from start to finish, it's very impressive. With that being said, the level of quality that is upheld in each and every one of those hours is staggering. Almost every game that I've ever played, even ones that I've absolutely adored, have some section or sometimes sections that are an absolute miserable slog to get through. Lies of P does not have one like that. Even my least favorite boss I found to be fun and engaging my second, third, and even fourth time through. Despite having sections that I like less than others, Lies of P doesn't have that part. Every level and every boss has a place in the game, and there's a reason they were included, which I grew to recognize even for the ones I really did not enjoy at first. Either way, the level structure does eventually all link together in a way that makes sense and allows you to connect the geographical dots as you play, despite feeling sort of strangely laid out at first. This part might not be important to some people, but I think anyone can appreciate it. Lies of P commits 100% to every single thing that they set out to do, something that most games don't really do. Most games put more effort into certain pieces and sort of cautiously invest in others, which, to be clear, is perfectly fine. Some ideas work out and some don't, so picking your battles is important as a game developer, or as any job for that matter. I suspect that the developers of this game trimmed down whatever they didn't want to fully commit to. This left them with a couple of core ideas that they could really hone in on and build off of it if they needed to. This is true for every single part of the game, and I really mean that, but it's most obvious in the game's presentation. I read the original story of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi specifically for this, and let me just say that what they managed to do with that source material is astounding. Like many old fairy tales, the story is strangely dark and pretty blunt, even as a cautionary tale for children. It's shockingly different, but Round 8 took a couple of basic concepts and turned it into this tragic tale through a gorgeous steampunk world developed by hatred and regret. Taking place at a time most closely attributed to the Belle Epoque era of Europe, Lies of P presents its music and art direction in a way that draws you into this period. One of the game's best uses are with the records. Records are a collectible in Lies of P that are also sort of a form of progression, which I am not gonna spoil. You'll get these from many different things, occasionally as a quest reward or talking to an NPC, and sometimes you can just buy them. These records are so good. They perfectly encapsulate the feeling of this era played over the gramophone with their grainy background noise. Some of these are sung in French, some in English, some are purely instrumental, and there are even alternate versions of certain tracks that you can get in New Game Plus. They can all be listened to in the hub area at any time, provided you've actually acquired them. They are completely separate from the game's already fantastic soundtrack, and they add so much to the atmosphere of the game. A couple of them even have some lore being created in-universe by certain characters or whatever. The records add a lot, but I don't really know enough about music to talk about them anymore, so we're gonna move on, but they are very, very good. The game feels very grand yet somber at the same time, with all of the rubble and carnage everywhere you look. Every single level is constructed in a way that makes sense as a world that people once lived in and walked around, rather than, just a level in a video game. Supported by the world's dynamic lighting, varied weather, and insanely detailed views of past areas, this feels like a real world that's been laid out with actual life in mind. It almost feels like somewhere you could actually go and visit, despite having a distinct fairy tale, dream-like quality. Pretty much the final thing that I want to talk about is the generally high standard of everything in this game. Putting aside my bias for all of the systems and mechanics in this game, it all just has a quite rare level of polish, even compared to FromSoft. Namely, the animations in this game are outstanding. Like music, this is something else that I don't really feel I can speak on too much because, again, I'm not a game dev, I'm not a musician, and I'm certainly not an animator. However, the animations in Lies of P are some of the finest animation work in any Souls game that I've personally seen. At least I think. I'm not even going to add my tried and true in my opinion at the end of this statement because I really don't think there's even an argument here. While I haven't played all the Soulsborne games, I have played the ones that most people say are the best, and the fluidity of enemy movements in this game are like no other. There's so many minor factors in the way enemies move that make every attack reactable in a fair way. In the short time that Lies of P has been out, there's been balance patches, bug fixes, content updates, all stuff that we don't usually get with these games. Lies of P feels like an impossible game. The level of quality it upholds from start to finish is something we rarely see in video games, and it's truly a shame that it didn't really get a chance in 2023's awards spotlight. In closing this video out, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. 1. Does Lies of P hold up to From Software's legendary series? Is it better? Worse? And more importantly, is Lies of P worth your time? As far as I'm concerned, I can't answer that first one for you. Whether or not the game compares is going to depend greatly on your own experience. I can tell you one thing for sure though. Lies of P is certainly deserving of your time, attention, and money. Even in a great year like 2023, with games like Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, and more, I still think Lies of P was overlooked. I'm not even saying that any one of those games deserved the prestigious Game of the Year award over another, but I am saying that Lies of P certainly deserved the same love and barrage of praise that the others got. Because, yes, it does deserve that attention. And it is undoubtedly, unequivocally, worth your time. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is yet another video that ended up just being a bit longer than I initially anticipated, so hopefully that was okay, and I'm also sorry for all the radio silence since the last video. I know it's been a minute. For people who have played the game, I know there's also a couple of things that I left out. This was because I either decided that people who haven't played the game should figure them out on their own, or I simply forgot. So sorry. I kind of can't wait to see the hate comments on this one. Probably because I said Sekiro was my favorite from... Anyways, I'm done running my mouth. Thank you for watching so much. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments below. Tell me who your favorite boss was. I'm very curious on everyone's take on that. And your least favorite boss especially. Jesus. I'd also appreciate if you liked or subscribed, as both would greatly help me out, more than you know. Regardless, have a great night, and I'll catch you in the next one.